Borders and Boundaries is the Linen Hall's newest project, which has been funded by the Department of Foreign Affairs Reconciliation Fund, and it's here to explore kind of the meanings and realities of living in borders and boundaries or along borders and boundaries across the last century. And tonight's event is going to focus on displacement. And I'm delighted to introduce our speakers. So we have Kate and Ray Rankin just behind me, Marian Kane and Twasul Mohammed, and of course our chair, Niall Gilmartin, a lecturer in sociology at the Ulster University. And thank you all for being here tonight, and I hope you enjoy.
Okay, good evening everyone, and echo Melissa's welcome to you all here this evening. It is quite timely, given the events that are occurring in Ukraine and Gaza, that we speak about displacement, but it's also most welcome that forced displacement during the Troubles here, the conflict that we euphemistically call the Troubles, is also publicly discussed, and the opportunity to hear the first-hand testimonies here this evening. I've been researching and writing about forced displacement here in Northern Ireland since 2016. And certainly two takeaway things that I take from it is the extent of displacement. I mean, I underestimated the extent of displacement. Like most people, I associated, displacement with the early years of the conflict. I had no idea the reach of this in terms of it affecting tens of thousands of citizens within Northern Ireland. And the second thing is the silence that bounds displacement. That the silence within families, the silence within communities, and the silence within the official narratives of the Troubles, and the silence towards dealing with the past, because displacement is conspicuously absent from discussions around legacy and dealing with the past. And the outbreak of violence in August '69 gave rise to a refugee crisis, which at the time represented the largest involuntary movement of persons in Europe since the Second World War. And of course, it redrew the ethno-sectarian boundaries here, particularly in this city. And, the idea that displacement is something that's unique to the start of the Troubles doesn't bear out in the evidence from the research that we've done and from the participants you'll hear tonight. It is a ubiquitous and central feature right the way throughout the conflict, and rather dolefully a central aspect and feature of life throughout the peace process right up to contemporary times. And, as a source of conflict-related harm, I mean, displacement has featured in peace-building processes in the Balkans and in Rwanda and other places, but it remains conspicuously absent here in Northern Ireland. And so, the research that I tried to do was try to give voice, or give the space for people to speak about their displacement experiences. And so, a quarter of a century on from the 1998 peace accord, it still feels like we're scratching the surface in terms of the layers of harm and loss that are out there. And certainly displacement is one particular feature in terms of its harm and its loss and its impact that really has yet to be recognised, let alone be addressed and acknowledged. It is impossible to quantify comprehensively the extent of displacement throughout the Troubles, but the existing figures are quite sobering. We know from the Scarman Tribunal that over 3,500 families were displaced in August '69. A report by John Darby in 1974 estimated, and in his words a conservative estimate, that up to 60,000 people in Belfast were displaced between '69 and '73 in this city alone. And from the research that I've done, I mean, Carrickfergus, Larne, Newton Abbey, Craigavon, all the major urban centres, Londonderry, the huge Protestant exodus, as it's called there, out of Derry city centre, but also the rural heartlands around the border, around Newry and Mourne, again, large Protestant movements out of there. It really is, I mean, the extent of this is quite sobering when we look at it. And of course, it is important to state that displacement is not unique to the Troubles. It is something that is featured in social and political life here going back through the decades and even through the centuries. There's even evidence going back as far as 1870, looking at involuntary movements of population and forms of social segregation. As I said earlier, intimidation in housing continues up to these days, motivated by sectarianism as well as racism. And so displacement, of course, involves intimidation, it involves fear, but it's important to state that there is no archetypal form of displacement. They come in many forms and many complexions. Some people fled their homes as they were torched or attacked, and others left quietly in the dead of night, packing up what meager belongings they had. So intimidation comes in the form of direct attacks in terms of physical attacks on persons, petrol bombs, gun attacks, paint bombs, etc. But there are also other forms of intimidation, which include attacks on religious institutions, education institutions, sporting and cultural, but also changes in environment, particularly for communities that found themselves living as a minority, frosted relationships, hostility, and that kind of slow grind of intimidation that builds up to a tipping point where people decide that it's better if they leave. The forced uprooting, of course, from home is a significant moment of rupture that's often not remedied by relocation to new dwellings. So often the approaches to displacement is find new home, new dwellings, new location, and begin a new life. But the rupture that occurs in people's lives is not just the loss of home and community, it's the loss of their social networks, their friendships, places of worship, employment. It is a moment of dislocation when people are violently moved. And there are short and long-term consequences to that, which we will discuss here this evening. And so maybe if we'll get started, maybe Marian, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about your early life and maybe before your first displacement, and then maybe tell us about your experiences of displacement.
All right. Can everybody hear me all right? And I'm inclined to talk a bit quick whenever I get nervous, so if I ramble on, you have to forgive me. I come from Ardoyne in North Belfast. I'm born and reared there, and I've lived there most of my life. I was my mummy and daddy and my granny and granda and my uncle and his wife and we was 3 families in one house. We lived in Old Ardoyne, and there were mill workers' houses. And my mummy and daddy had kind of been their names down to be rehoused. Now, my daddy had been in the British Army when he was younger, the World War II, and mummy had come from Cork, and she met him in England. She was working in a laminations factory in Bath, and I could see ATS, you called the organisation she worked for, but they met on a train and eventually got married. The result of that was my mummy's family disowned her for a couple of years because not only did she marry a British soldier, she married somebody from the Black North, which wasn't very popular in Cork where she came from. So she never really settled really here. She never really liked it. She just had to put up with it. They actually got rehoused in a wee prefab. It's in Sydenham. It's a tin hut, and it's now where George Best Airport is. So we moved to there, and then we were rehoused in Highfield, which was a new kind of estate built, and it was predominantly Protestant in those days, but there was a few Catholics moved in, our family included, and on the 12th of July coming up, there was a big round field in the middle. We were in a crescent, and usually the 12th of July that got the celebrations going and the fire and the bonfire, and there were 2 policemen assigned, 2 guards, the few Catholics that lived in the area. And that night, they just got out of control. And the policemen actually got drunk as well with their revellers, and my daddy's car was burnt. And outside, on the footpath, they wrote, "No Free State or walks the Queen's Highway," referring to my mum. And we actually had to run out the back door and down West Circle Road up to Dale Avenue, back into Ardoyne, and we never got back to the house. My daddy went back to see it the next day. The house had been just damaged and wrecked inside. So I was only 6. It was 1954. So that was my first experience of being displaced. And even though I was still young, I knew that I wasn't welcome and I wasn't wanted, and I was afraid. The next experience then, rolling on, I got married in 1967 and unfortunately bought a house in Hooker Street off the Crumlin Road, where the trouble started in 1969. There was a pub at the bottom of the street, and there's all talk about how it happened, but an orange parade was coming up the road outside it, and somebody's supposed to put a tricolour up to the window. I don't know what happened, but there was an invasion. There was a big rat and an invasion of loyalists and base specials and all sorts coming down into the street. And later on that night, they actually wrecked some of the houses. So most of the women and children were evacuated, and were actually evacuated to West Belfast then. That was my second experience for displacement. I had 2 children at the time, and we were in St Kevin's School up in North Britain's Parade in West Belfast. And we were like just in a big assembly hall, and there was kind of hard beds and stuff. So I didn't stay too long. I just said I'd take my chances and I'm going back home again. When I went home, my husband had went over to stay in my mum's house, and our house was riddled with gunfire. Seemingly, and all the ceilings were all the big holes in the ceilings, and the rumour that went around the time, though I can't confirm it was correct, but every house had a hole in the ceiling, that there was guns stored up in those houses, and that they came to retrieve the guns. And I had a dressing table in the bedroom and the mirror. They must have saw the reflection of themselves in the mirror, and they riddled the whole bedroom with gunfire. So I couldn't stay there any longer, and then we actually moved down up the Ballysillan Road, up the Crumlin Road to Ballysillan, where I wanted my kids to grow up in a mixed area. And at that time, our town was predominantly mixed. It was a mixture of Catholics and Protestants, nearly equal. And the street I lived on, I had lovely Protestant neighbours. And lo and behold, in 1971, internment started. So we were in a mixed area, and I didn't know that they had burnt houses in our town. So there's a lorry coming up and down the street, and I was actually 7 months pregnant at the time. And they were shouting for all the females to get out, and there was a Union Jack on the lorry and all sorts. And I was terrified, and we phoned the police, and the police said, like, you just have to get out. There's nothing we can do. This is happening all over North Belfast. So we went down out the back and down, you call it the Bray, down west, down the West Circle Road. Sorry, not the West Circle, Crumlin Road, and back into Ardoyne, and I've been there ever since. And whenever I went down into Ardoyne, I was seven months pregnant. So my husband had to go and stay with his mum in West Belfast, and I stayed with my mum and dad with the 2 children. And then it was October when my child was born, but before that, I was evacuated again, and we went down to Silverbridge outside Newry. The buses were outside the school, and everybody was all pushed onto the buses. Some went to Gormanstown, some of them went to all different places, and I ended up with other people in the school in Silverbridge, which is just on the border. And because of my condition, and you were sleeping again in hard beds, I asked could I go on down to stay with my mum's sister in Cork, and they did take me to the station and paid for my train fare down, and I stayed there for 6 weeks. And while I was there, I put my name down for a house. I didn't want to go back to Belfast. If I had got a house, I'd have stayed there, but I never came back again. But I had to come home because I had to have the baby, and she was born in the Royal on the 12th of October. And when I was getting out of the hospital, I had no home to go home to because the furniture was all gone, and I had no house, so I was still paying a mortgage for it because I put a deposit down. And then a guy in the street where my mummy lived in Storial Park, he was an insurance man, and the family he knew were emigrated to Australia, and they gave him the keys to the house and said, if somebody needs a house, just give them the keys and let them go into it. So the day I got out of hospital, the man gave my mummy the keys, and we moved in. I'd never seen the house before. And that you just were squatter then, you were squatters' rights. But I was still paying my mortgage, and then I had to pay a squatter's rent as well. And when I opened the front door, 1, 2, 3 streets in front of me was Cranbrook, Falshada and Farrington, and that was over 400 houses, and every one of those houses had been burnt during internment. And I just never put a paintbrush to the house, never decorated for about 10 years. I just lost, and I'm going to be burnt out again. This happened too often. And actually my husband was a bricklayer, and I asked him to build a big wall, 6-foot wall outside the house, because I was terrified. And I thought with internment we're all going to be annihilated and shot and all sorts of things. I went on to have 2 more children, and to bring them kids up in that area, it was really terrifying. I had 2 boys and 3 girls, and the soldiers were up and down the street. They were based in the bus depot in the street I lived in, and just every day you were concerned and worried about your kids, your husband going to work, and was he going to come back home again, because it wasn't that nothing could happen to him, because a lot of my friends had died and been killed, and I was just waiting on the day a knock would come to the door and say that he was shot dead. And he worked in different areas because he was a bricklayer on the building sites. And thank God it hadn't happened to him, but he had a brother killed in McGurk's bar, and he had uncles blew up and all sorts of things happening. So it was just there for the grace of God, go I. When the kids went to school, I just got involved in community work in the area. There was a thing called the People's Assembly, and they formed because we were in such a small confined space, and the soldiers had shot out all the lights, street lights, because they can't see through their night lights and the guns in the dark. And then this People's Assembly got people to put lights outside all the doors, cost us £1, and that meant you could open your door and you had a bit of light, because people were afraid to go out, and they were also afraid to open their doors. And there was sometimes that people were arrested and they were taken away for 7 or 8 days. You didn't know where they were. So the People's Assembly were able to go down and find out where they were and let the families know. And they were able to do a lot of coming and going. So I joined the People's Assembly then, and the men were just vigilanting around the streets. So cricket bats, they had nothing. There was no IRA, there was no guns, there was no nothing in those days. And you just felt you were intimidated and you had to protect your area. So if the billets went and the whistles went, you were out, and you tried to help everybody. So basically from then on, I just got involved in cross-community work and peace building work. Joined the Peace People, Women Together, joined everything. Went to all the rallies for peace and all, and it didn't make much difference. Things still went on, but I just helped to work within the community and wanted to build a better future for my children. And I have grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And in all honesty, it's settled down, there's no more killing, but still under the surface I don't feel safe, and I still think it could erupt again, and I just pray that doesn't happen, because I don't want my family to go through what I went through, living a whole life of being afraid, and I never felt welcome here. I always felt I didn't belong because I'm Irish and Catholic, and my kids, I was fearful for them. And if I got a bus going down the Shankill Road, I didn't call them Kevin and their names, I called them Billy and somebody else, because you were afraid. Just had that whole thing about fear and who you are and who you didn't belong here. So hopefully that will never happen to anybody else again. But I just do still worry for the future, and just hope that all this thing settles down and Stormont gets up and running, and I get angry and frustrated with the politicians. And I got involved in the Women's Coalition, and I wouldn't go into politics, but I got involved in a lot of things to try and help. And really it's just to be small circle. That's all you can do, is just to be trickle, and just to sit back and feel and hope that things will settle down and never go back to what we suffered before. Thank you.
Thank you, Marian. Thank you. Thank you, Marian. Similar question for Raymond and Kathleen. Early life, pre-displacement, and then do you want to describe the circumstances about how and when you and your family were displaced?
Yeah. Well, actually, I lived in the next street to you, and I didn't even know you. No, I lived in Cranbrook.
Oh, Cranbrook, right.
Yeah. I lived in Cranbrook Gardens, and I had 2 grannies. And one was a Catholic and one was a Protestant. And my mother had 10 children, and we all loved both our grannies. And everything was okay, and we used to go down and visit them and bring them wee things down to keep them happy. And whenever we were growing up, we had a bonfire on the 12th of July, and the Catholics from Northwick used to come up to our bonfire. And whenever on the 14th, isn't it the 15th of August, the Catholics had a bonfire, and we all went down to theirs. And that's the way it was. Everybody was just all together. And I had as many Catholic friends as I had Protestant friends. And when the trouble started, it was very dangerous to go out at night, and people were more inclined to stay in their own areas, and they wouldn't drift about. But as I say, I loved my both grannies the same, so we were just brought up as Protestants, but they were both different religions, but it didn't make no difference to us. And anyway, my mother moved into the house in Cranbrook. She was the first person in the house, and as I say, she had 10 children, and every single one of us, from the oldest to the youngest, chummed with a different religion, and everything was hunky-dory for years until all this trouble started. And I don't know how it started, because I think it was just people were getting on too well, and they didn't really want it. Certain people didn't really want that. But as I say, I had Catholic friends who, when the trouble started, they were afraid to come to me, and I was afraid to go to them. And it was awful, because you lost your friends. And years later, when I was working years later in a community house just off the Shankill on Tennant Street, I ran the community house, and it was children, pensioners and teenagers, but all different times, of course. And one day I went outside and I was cleaning the window, and I looked up the street and I saw these 2 girls coming down, and I recognised them. There was quite a bit away, but I recognised the 2 of them right away. And there were 2 girls from Ardoyne, and they recognised me. And they told me whenever we met up, they said, "We're going, oh, she'll not speak to us, she'll not talk to us." And I was going, I hope they talk, you know. But when they came down, I started to laugh. Just that guy there, they got to there, and I just started to laugh. And then the both of them became friends, and we're still friends to this day. And they live not far from where I live. So it was awful that you lost friends for no reason at all. The people who started all this, whoever the heck they were, I don't know who they were, but they've got a lot on their conscience, because innocent people were killed, and innocent people were, no matter what happened to them, it was awful. And we then moved whenever we got married. Most of my family was all married, and I was one of the last ones to get married. And 2 months after we got married, and we were still at home, and my husband stayed with us until we got somewhere to live. And that was the night of the bad trouble. And the next morning, my mother and father, we said, "You have to get out. You can't stay here. This has just gone too far." And as I say, everybody in my family, my mother's best friend was a Catholic. My father's best friend was Geordie Lennis, and he lived just facing Ardoyne Chapel. And we always were mixed when we were playing. And whenever, I'm getting a bit confused here. Anyway, we became friends again with the Catholic people that we knew. And to this day, we're still friends. And when I see them, they'd be all glad to see me, but they're afraid to come into different areas still, which is sad to say. But oh yeah, with interment day, it was absolutely terrible. Absolutely terrible. The buses out of the depot were all taken out of the depot and put across the streets, blocking off all the streets. And they were shooting up from Northwick Drive up our street. Why, I don't know, because there was nobody in the street, because everybody was hiding in their houses, but they were still shooting up the street. And when the next day, everybody decided that they were going to have to move and get out. And when we were trying to take my father out, my father was a Dunkirk veteran, and he had 10 medals, and no, about 8 medals it was. He had 8 medals, and for bravery, because he carried his best friend. When his friend was shot, he carried him all the way to Dunkirk, and then he got wounded at Dunkirk himself. So he lived in that house in Cranbrook, and the day that we were taking him out, he couldn't put one foot in front of the other because he had rheumatoid arthritis. He couldn't sit. All he could do was stand, lean over a chair like this, a high up chair. We got a big cushion made for him, so he just leaned on that. He could lie down flat, or he could lean over this thing, and that's what he did. Some days he was about 7 hours. He wouldn't sit. He wouldn't lie down. But when he was going out that door, they were shooting up the street. We couldn't get him into the car, so we had to just push him in. And it was a wee mini car, and we just had to push him in. And we were crying and he was crying and he was squealing blue murder because we were pushing him and his bones was all sore. And we had to move to a flat in Glencairn, 4 floors up. But when he lived in Cranbrook, he could have stood at the door, leaning over the chair, and people going by would have stopped and talked to him. Everybody talked to him, everybody knew him. But when he went to this 4th floor flat, he never came out of there. He never came out of there. He never came down the stairs because he couldn't do the stairs. He was carried in and he was carried out in a box. And we just never got over that. I'm getting a bit emotional about it all, really.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah. I mean,
I was going out with Kate for many years before the Troubles even started. So I was going up into Cranbrook Gardens during the whole time after 1969 when the Troubles were ongoing. My uncle lived in number 9 Disraeli Street, which was about 4 doors down from the Crumlin Road. So when the Troubles started at Herbert Street, Disraeli Street Junction, houses were burnt on both sides of the Crumlin Road. His house was one of them. He owned his own house, and one of his neighbours decided that it was too dangerous to live in Disraeli Street, and she decided to move out, and she wanted to sell her house, and very foolishly my uncle decided he would buy that house. So he moved into a house further down Disraeli Street and was burned out for the second time. And then he moved from there to Glenbryn, and he wasn't, he left Glenbryn because Glenbryn became a ghost town because houses were being purchased by some unknown agent, and the houses weren't being relet, they were simply bricked up. So you could be living in a street with a bricked up house on either side of you and bricked up houses opposite you. Nobody knew who owned these houses, but that encouraged more people to sell up and move out, so the area was becoming more and more depopulated. And he eventually sold his house to the person who was acting as an agent, and he moved out of there. But going back to Cranbrook Gardens, I don't think that people really appreciate how much stress and tension there were in the Protestant areas in Ardoyne as well as the Catholic areas. It was impossible to go to bed at night and relax and sleep, so most people sat up all night watching people walking up and down the street, and if an unknown person walked past, everybody was, who's that and what's he doing? Has he got something in his hands? And there was crowds started to gather at the bottom of the street, Catholics crowds from the Northwick Drive and the other areas, and they were chanting, and on one occasion there was someone came out of the crowd with a machine gun and fired the machine gun at a house 3 or 4 doors just below where Kate and her mother lived, riddled the house, the front of the house. Kate's brother lived in Farringdon Gardens, almost directly behind where his mother lived, and he had been in the British Army and he had left the army, and he got married and he moved into a house in Farringdon Gardens with his wife. They had had their first child and she had had a caesarean section, and it was he called it a bollocks operation. She didn't recover quickly from it, but she was assaulted by her Catholic neighbour who lived across the street from her, and she was trying to protect herself, and she had to be in the pram, and the pram rolled away down the street. Fortunately, someone had left their gate open, and that stopped the pram going down the street. My brother-in-law, Kate's brother, was assaulted on several occasions. A group of soldiers walked down the street and stopped because his next-door neighbour happened to be English, and she was speaking to her husband, and when they heard the English accent, they stopped to inquire. And that, of course, raised the dander of the people who were living opposite. And they came out and started to assault the English woman who lived next door to my brother-in-law. He came out to try and help to protect this woman, and before he knew it, there was a crowd of men at his gate who appeared from nowhere, and they were standing at his gate shouting, "Protestants out, Protestants out." He then received, strangely enough, a visit from an army major. The light infantry were the regiment in the area at the time. And this army major came down and asked him why he was harassing his Catholic neighbours, which of course caused a rather rankled in a way. But he was targeted, as I say, because he was ex-British Army. Kate's father was British Army. Our brother, who still lived at home, was in the Royal Navy, or had been in the Royal Navy. So the family had a tradition of military service, and this was known. So they were being targeted by people in the area. The tension in the area kept building up, until it erupted. The bubble was bound to burst. It erupted on the night of internment. Kate and I were living in a flat in Glencairn, and we were getting up to go to work. And we heard doors banging, and we wondered what was going on. And then we saw someone we knew, and we asked him, "What's happening?" He says, "The Protestants are moving out of Ardoyne." And he was there trying to find empty flats to put his family in. So we found that one of the empty flats in the block that this family were moving into was also empty. So we booked that for Kate's parents, and we went over to see what we could do for them. And we spent the whole morning trying to persuade her father to leave the house because he just didn't want to go. He knew how difficult it would be for him to leave the house that he had lived in for 41 years and how disruptive that would be. But eventually, because of the shooting that was going on, but there was actually an interchange of fire between IRA and the army. The army were at the top of the street, and the IRA were firing at the army, and the army were firing down the street. And unfortunately, an innocent Protestant woman was shot. The army mistook this woman for a sniper and shot her in her own kitchen because she was looking out to see what was going on. The people were moved, and it was like a house of cards. One just went, and then the next one went, and then the next one went, and the terror just spread across the streets, from one street to the next, to the next. And there was no organised repatriation of people because no one expected this to happen. So people who just happened to know somebody, say a coal man who had a lorry, people went to them and asked them, "Could you go up and move such and such?" So the lorries were being almost hijacked and brought up to the area to carry people's belongings. Not everybody got their belongings out. Some belongings were left behind, and unfortunately there were a few families who were on holiday and their belongings were lost. The houses were burned to the ground. There were people who were injured. My next door neighbour, my mother's next door neighbour on the Shankill Road, came up to help move his aunt who lived in Cranbrook Gardens, and he was carrying her furniture out through the back door, up the back entry, to try and put it on a lorry at the top of the street. And someone came out of one of the houses in, what street was that, Estoril? Out of one of the backyards in Estoril and stabbed him. So he ended up in intensive care in the Royal for trying to help his aunt to move out. Lots of events like that happened in the area, but as I say, it wasn't organised by the Protestants. It was just sheer terror and the build-up of all the tension and stress over months and months. And eventually the bubble burst, and when one family left, it frightened others into leaving, and the whole area was left. Now, I read somewhere that people leaving their homes was an act of desperation. And the fact that a lot of people decided that they would damage their houses rather than allow the other side to move into them, that was an act of despair. So the houses were damaged. A lot of houses were damaged, not all of them. Her parents' houses wasn't damaged, but some of them were, and then of course one of the houses went up in flames. The fire brigade weren't obviously going to come down and put any fires out, and because the houses had a communal roof space, the whole block went. So it wasn't a case of the Protestants set fire to their houses and each and every one did that. One house went up and the rest followed. The Protestants had nowhere to go. They were taken out of their homes, but they didn't have anywhere to go. There was a scramble in all the areas in and around the Ballysillan, Silverstream, anywhere at all that there could have been an empty house. People were going around banging on doors, and there was no one in the house, or they were told there was no one in the house. The door was kicked in and the family was put in. Lots of them ended up in church halls. I must say there was a notable absence, I thought, of unionist politicians helping Protestants to move, to direct, organise. There was no one doing anything. The only people who were helping were local churches. The minister there would open the church hall and let people go and stay in the church hall. So it was chaotic, it wasn't organised, and it had a profound effect on everyone who had to leave their homes that night. There was quite a few people. Her father was in his 70s, but there was lots of people in the area who were elderly, and they didn't survive for very long. The trauma was just too much for them. Kit's father moved into a 4th floor flat, and he was there until basically he died. He was carried in, as she said, and he was carried out. He was able to stand in the living room of this flat that we had acquired for him and look directly across from Glencairn at Ardoyne, and he could see the street that he had lived in and all the houses burning. And he stood and he cried. Never saw a man cry in my life. That was him. Thank you.
Thank you, Raymond. Thank you very much. Again, it's the personal testimony, the powers that speaks to the loss of home. It is not just the loss of the material home, it's the deep impact. It's almost like the pebble dropping into the whirlpool and the ripples of impact that it has on people's health and well-being. It really is powerful. Twasul, you work with refugees and asylum seekers coming here to Northern Ireland, and I was struck by even Raymond's refrain that people don't leave their homes and don't leave their communities lightly. They have to be driven by fear and intimidation. Does much of what you hear resonate with the people that you work with? And maybe if you could just speak a little bit about the kind of work that you do with refugees and asylum seekers here in Northern Ireland.
Yes, so I'm from Sudan, and I moved here in 2016. And since I came here, I started hearing stories from people, and listening to you. All of you lived in Ardoyne before, and I lived with my kids in Ardoyne for a year. And I think because of everything that you went through in Ardoyne, when I came here, I moved in Ardoyne in 2017, and straight away I sensed the strength of the community in Ardoyne, maybe because of everything that has happened. And me and my family got lots of support in Ardoyne, even though we are coming from a foreign country. But people were telling me that they are helping us because they understand what it means for people to be forced away from their countries or from their homes. And speaking about all the housing intimidation, make me think of all the people I'm supporting right now. I work with refugees and asylum seekers, and I'm sure most of you have heard of all the intimidation that refugees and asylum seekers in Northern Ireland are facing recently. And I would say, even though I spent here just maybe less than 7 years, I could see the change from when I came here. And I think that's probably because of the hostile environment by the UK Home Office. And I think all the hostile policies from the Home Office are driving all this racism and intimidation towards refugees and asylum seekers. So I have been supporting my fellow refugees and asylum seekers since I started working in PPR, Participation and the Practice of Rights, and it's a human rights campaigning organization. We work in different campaigns, mental health, housing, and we work with asylum matters. Some of the people we have been supporting are asylum seekers in a hotel in Bangor, and these are single men, around 50 of them accommodated in this hotel. The use of hotels started in Northern Ireland around 2021. Before that, the practice was whenever asylum seekers arrive here, they will be accommodated in contingency accommodation for not more than 4 weeks before they are dispersed in the wider community. But then in 2021, MERS company, MERS is a private company responsible of the accommodation of asylum seekers. They started using hotels as contingency accommodation during COVID for lockdown for 2 weeks, but then they continued with it in complete silence and not any political oversight. So these asylum seekers in Bangor are accommodated in a hotel, which no one like to be. I know that if, for anyone who is not aware of the conditions in these hotels will think that this is luxury. And in fact, some people before recorded a film in front of one of these hotels, asking people where they come from and why they are here and what they do. And they were talking in the film and saying how people are living in hotels in luxury, and this is tax money paid by the local people. And this is not true, because people are not living in luxury, and people are living on other people's tax money because they are not allowed to work. The Home Office don't allow people to work. So these boys in Bangor, they're young, they're qualified, they want to work, but they're not allowed to work. So they are trapped in this hotel, and they have people protesting in front of this hotel every Friday. When you talk about housing accommodation, I know this is a hotel, I know it's temporary, but it's still someone's home. And for them to see people every Friday night with posters saying that they are criminals and they are rapists, these are just normal people and young men. Some of them left their families since they were 14 or 15, and they left countries that are torn by wars, and most of the times they will be fleeing persecution, and they are already traumatized, and they face further trauma during their journey from their home country coming here, and now they face more trauma by these people standing in front of their homes every Friday night, and the police would do nothing about it. They would just come and ask people not to leave the hotel so that no conflict happens. So they don't stop people from standing in front of them, but they ask them to just stay imprisoned in these hotels. We started supporting them, and the first thing we asked them if they want a counter protest, and they said no, because then protesters will come and go, but the problem will be staying. And we asked how we can support, and they said maybe to connect them to the local community, because they saw the change too in the street. When they first arrived in Bangor, they were welcomed. People were nice to them, but since the protesters came, things became worse and worse. So we held a few meetings to connect them to the community, and there were a few organizations, community organizations in Bangor, who were willing to support them. In our first meeting, it was very good. Many organizations came, and the boys wanted to volunteer with the organizations and give something to the community. And we went back to Belfast, did some work, and we organized the second meeting. But in the second meeting, only one person came. The rest of the people, one person from the community organizations came. The rest of the people didn't come, because they received a threat from paramilitaries warning them not to work with refugees and asylum seekers. And I mean, you just, you feel like refugees and asylum seekers arriving here have no choice. People are feeling they come here, they want to make it home here, but some people just don't want that to happen. And people are talking about the refugee crisis and all, and the housing issues. But we know that this is not caused by refugees. Yes, there is a housing issue. Yes, there is a deteriorating NHS, but it's not because of refugees, and people need to address the root of the issues and not just let the government get away with blaming refugees for everything. And another issue I'm sure you heard of is racial attacks in South Belfast in businesses. These are other refugees, and I know many of them, and they are just also people settling down and trying to make life here. And they are, talking to one of them was saying these shops were closed for years and years, and this area was dead. And we thought us opening the shops and making it live again should be a good thing, and we don't know why they are just attacking us. And again, you don't know why the police isn't doing anything about it. All this intimidation in the hotels, in the businesses in South Belfast, and I don't know if I'm taking a long time. Yeah. I talked before about the Mears company, which is a private company, and it was given this contract by the Home Office, and it's more than 13 million pounds contract. They are making lots of profit of this contract. And we know that the Home Office policy for asylum was that people should take their decision in less than 6 months. But I think as part of the hostile environment and trying to discourage people from coming here, for the last years, the Home Office haven't been processing claims. So they have a backlog of asylum seekers claims, and then Rishi Sunak decided to clear the backlog. And now we're seeing since August, more and more people getting decisions on their claims, and most people get their permission to stay in the UK. And asylum seekers stay in Mears accommodation, and then when they get their status, they are given 28 days to leave Mears accommodation, and then they join the housing executive waiting list. And now, because more and more people are getting their status, and the Home Office didn't share that with the housing executive, didn't warn them, didn't give them heads up, so people just turn to the housing executive and they have no accommodation for them. And the Home Office notice for leaving the first accommodation was 28 days, and now it's reduced. Sometimes people get just 8 or 6 days, and it doesn't give them time to find another type of accommodation. So for the last week, we have seen big numbers of people evicted from Mears accommodation, and they don't have any place to go. So we have been working with CATU, which is a tenant community action, so trying to resist these evictions, working with people. And we tried working with the housing executive too, but all they say is they don't have accommodation for these people, and that the Home Office should have consulted with local authorities to find them something before they. One of the families we have been working with last week is a single mom with a boy, a 3-year-old boy, and the family needs lots of support, and they only survived in Belfast for the last years with support of Women's Aid and community groups and the Anaka Women's Collective and the support of friends. And now they are evicted from Mears accommodation, and the housing executive said the only place they have is in Derry. And it's okay to place people in Derry, but it's not okay when people came here and stayed in Belfast for a year and created this network of support, and now they're sending them to Derry to start again with no support at all. It's difficult for everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Twasul. It's thank you. I think the commonality across all the testimonies here is this assumption that once people flee the initial source of fear or insecurity, that marks the end of the episode, and clearly that's not the case. It's just the next tier of struggling to deal with the consequences of it. And if maybe we could ask the panel to maybe discuss like the impact that displacement has had on your lives, the short-term impact and maybe the long-term impact.
Sorry, I mean, I'm just speaking for myself. Everybody has their own separate stories. And I just want to comment that I was actually shocked to hear some of the stuff from you, because I lived in Ardoyne at the time as well, and it's like two different kind of stories. Yes, and I mean, Cranbrook's just 2 streets away from where I ended up living. And, it's a completely different story from where I come from. So it was really good to hear your side of the story. And it's awful for everybody. But I just feel, personally myself, I will never feel contented again, and I will never feel normal. And I mean, I have grandchildren and great-grandchildren. 2 of my grandchildren actually recently bought houses in Glengormley, and it's a mixed story. And when one of my granddaughters went to look at it, there was Union Jacks in the street and all I said to her was, like, you need to move on from this, because you're buying a house, and I think you need to be able to just go where you want to. She loved the house, and some of her friends kept saying, oh, don't bloody well be getting in there, whatever, because she's a member of the GAA and she plays camogie and she's very Irish orientated, whatever. And I said to her, like, it is, if you like that house, you just take a step and you go and live in that house. And there's more people who do that, the better things are going to be, because you need to make friends. And she's there 4 years, and our neighbours are brilliant to her. A friend of mine worked in the area as a community worker, and I said to her just on the QT to make sure I wasn't giving her wrong advice, because it would die just to get put out. And she said, 20 years ago, I would have said, no way, don't let a Catholic move in there. But all those, she called them dinosaurs, they were all paramilitary, ex-paramilitaries, they're all down off and they're all moved on, and it's just a normal community now, and she just absolutely enjoys it. And my other granddaughter, she was the same. She bought a house similar. It's a mixed community. They all live together. The children all play together, and that's what I want to see for the future. Now, they're contented. They're happy where they are, but I would still be worried, because that's just my experience of the life, and I regret that I'd lived that whole life in fear and whatever, but hopefully it's all going to move on. And listening even to the asylum seekers, we were not really 100% aware of all that. I did see it on the news about the shops and all, you think it's awful. And well, I used to kind of say to myself, they don't want anybody living beside them. So I mean, if we were put out and that felt displaced, there's no welcome for people like yourselves as well. And we have a lot of people in Ardoyne from foreign communities, foreign countries, and they all get on very well, and the neighbours are very good and whatever. But I must say they don't mix very well with people like with us. Kind of keep themselves to their own, the big families and stuff, but they're more than welcome. And because I think we experienced all that, we would open our arms to people and make people feel very, very welcome. And the people in Belfast are very welcoming. You get on the bus and you go into the town, you hear their life story, it doesn't matter where they're from, and it is lovely, so people have a lovely nature, so I just hope things work out for the best for the future.
Perfect, thanks Marian. And maybe Raymond or Kate, like you can see tonight, like it's raw, it's very raw, and I know from speaking to you before in your homes, it is, the impact is still there over 50 years later. Can you maybe just share with us here tonight the impact that it had on you and your family, short term, long term?
I just, as I said to you, my friends from Ardoyne, I'm still friends with them, and it's good to see that people have moved on, and just to keep away from all the trouble. I just don't want any more trouble. Kids growing up now have a better life now, and even the young teenagers have better life, and it's good to see. And you wouldn't like that to happen again, really. Definitely not. I don't think the older people like myself, I'm like 76, I'm 76 now, and I don't think older people could just take that again. I couldn't take it. If somebody came and told me to get out of my house, I don't know. I don't know what I would do. Just don't know what I would do. And thank you for listening to me, and it sort of helped me a wee bit to get a bit off my chest and feel a bit better actually for it, believe it or not. So thank you very much.
Well, I have to say that my son was married to a Roman Catholic. Their marriage broke up, but it wasn't because she was a Roman Catholic. And my daughter has a partner who's a Roman Catholic. So our family is fully integrated, if you like. We live in a mixed area. We get on very well with our Catholic neighbours. We hope that in the future that people will learn to live together with each other, and that people will be treated as they should be and judged on their personality and their character rather than what religion they are. I have to admit that I was a slow starter because I was born and bred on the Shankill Road, and I never consciously had a Catholic friend until I was 18, because when I went to university, that was the first time I consciously came across a Roman Catholic. The area that I lived in obviously was 100% Protestant. I have loads of Catholic friends. We get on reasonably well, and we argue a lot, but we still get on. In the case of the displacement of Kate's parents, it did have a dramatic and long-reaching effect on both of them. As I say, Kate's father never left the house that he moved into. Kate's mother did eventually get alternate accommodation, but unfortunately, she had a stroke a month after she moved into her house, and she died. So she only got 1 month in the new home that she had moved into, which was tragic. Her brother still has grievances because of the situation that he found himself in. His memory is still quite long and raw, so he has to live with it. I spoke to him today, and the emotion poured out. It was still obviously just bubbling below the surface. And I read an article that said that most people in Northern Ireland, because of the Troubles, are suffering from PTSD. And I think that that is a really correct comment, because there's lots of things that I've seen and heard people say and do that obviously is not normal, and it can only be explained by their past experiences of what went on. I mean, Kate didn't bring it up tonight, but when Kate was 8 months pregnant, she was 10 yards away from the front door of the Abercorn. Her and her sister used to go there every Saturday afternoon. And they made a delay that night because her sister asked her to go into British Home Stores and buy a pot. And they just were coming out of the British Home Stores when the bomb went off. So I could have lost Kate that night, plus my 8-month baby. And when you look back on it, nearly everybody in Northern Ireland has a similar story to tell of there but for the grace of God go I. Some people were unfortunate and they lost friends and relatives. I lost lots of friends in the Troubles. But fortunately, my family, my immediate family, weren't affected. Although, again, my daughter was working in a coffee shop 2 doors away from where the Shankill bomb exploded. Now, she suffers from PTSD because of that, because the people who were injured, the first shop that was still standing was the one she happened to be working in. She was 17, and she ended up doing first aid for people who had bomb injuries. So she has problems, and because of that, it affected her relationships for many, many years. And it's only recently, within the last 4 years, that she found someone and was able to form a partnership. So, you know, displacement, when you think about it, has affected, particularly at the time, the older generation. A lot of them didn't survive it. And the younger generation hold grudges and harbour hatred because of the experiences that they had. I know that Kate's brother had many friends who lived in that area. All they were interested in was having a drink and going out with girls. After internment, when they were displaced from their homes and their parents were thrown out of their homes, they started to join the paramilitaries. The same thing happened on the other side. And, you know, these events have, as you say, the ripples spread out. And unfortunately, unless somebody can put a boundary up and stop the ripples spreading, it will continue, I think, for another generation until our generation dies out. But hopefully that'll happen in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raymond. Have we time, Melissa, for... Okay, we're kind of conscious of the clock. I think it's just gone 7, just after 7 o'clock. So 5 minutes for comments and questions. I think you're...
Sorry, yes, I just been very, very interesting and indeed very sad to listen to your stories. But it's also very, very obvious that all of you indeed are still, you know, really coming away or trying to come away from what happened, and that you are, in a sense, it is still with you, and it probably will never leave you. You go forward, but you can't really forget, and you're carrying that sad time, terrible time with you. And I think it was very obvious listening to you all speaking this evening, and I felt very sad because of that.
Thank you.
I think I could join a few of you in just bawling about the whole thing. Because when all of you were talking, all 4 of you, it made me realise that I had actually not counted myself as somebody who'd been affected by any of these experiences, but I have been in ways I'm not even going to, you know, explain because it would take too long. But Twasul's account of what's happening to asylum seekers and refugees here is particularly relevant because Andy and I had an experience of having to leave a house because of intimidation, which didn't even count legally as intimidation, because we were allowed to sell the house. It took a long time, and there was a pregnancy and a new baby involved as well. And move to a safer place where people are very willing to leave each other alone in a pleasant way and help each other in a pleasant way. Because of that, we've become very much more open to trying to help other people who've come here from elsewhere, because our experience is such a tiny thing compared with what's happened to particularly a family who've become very good friends from Khartoum. And of course, their home, since they left there for other reasons, because they'd fallen foul of the Janjaweed, they've no home to go back to, because it's not just that they've had to leave their country, but there is no country now for them, you know, same as yourself. And I would love to see people's experience of all these horrible events making us better and not worse. I don't understand how those people in Bangor are picketing somebody whose experiences should be so intelligible to them.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your comment. Yeah, okay. We go. Sorry, one more.
Thank you very much for all of your comments. I was just wondering, we talk about like individuals moving and maybe kind of communities moving, but I was wondering about, you mentioned church halls, and I was just wondering, and you mentioned schools, and I was just wondering how the kind of institutions of a community, did they move with you? Even if the buildings didn't, those kind of community networks, did they move? Or did you have to start from scratch, you know, like a whole class load of children moving into a school?
Well, I found in Ardown, even though we moved to school in West Belfast, it was community-led. There was like a community, it was People's Assembly first, then was the Citizens Defence Committee, and it was mostly kind of older men, and they kind of just, they're like leaders in their own time. There was nothing political or not motivated about, nothing paramilitary about it or anything, and they just showed great community spirit, and the community responded to the needs of the community. There was nothing, nobody was coming in and helping from outside, and even the church, I mean our chapel, okay, people still went to Mass, but a lot of people drifted off from the church because there was no support, no reaction during, I think they just wanted to wash their hands of the whole political scene, and they didn't want to say something in case maybe somebody says, oh, they're taking the side of the IRA, blah, blah, blah. You know, they didn't even condemn, say, the army and atrocities that happened and whatever. So, no, everything was nearly all community-led, and all the structures and all the things that happened within were all came from the community. And nobody, no institution, no organisation, just came into the area. Everybody supported each other, give food, give baby clothes, nappies and whatever. It was a whole big community support, and it was absolutely wonderful to see. But people didn't realise at the time that it was wonderful, but it did. It kept the community spirit alive, and I think that spirit has still stayed along all those years, because people remember what happened, and they will still support each other. So it's great community spirit there.
Okay, thank you very much, Marian. And with that, maybe we'll draw the event to a close. But just to say, like, it's a privilege for all of us to sit here and listen. I mean, if we can learn from the past, it's wholly dependent on the generosity of people like our panel tonight to come along and give us their testimony, their experiences and perspectives. And so if you could please join me in thanking tonight's panellists. Thank you.